Florida through a period of extraordinary economic growth, and under his leadership, Florida has continued to deepen its role as the commercial, logistical, and cultural bridge between the United States and the Caribbean. Everything we've discussed today, from the infrastructure, security, investment, and the workforce in ports, much of that conversation runs directly through this state, Florida. So, Governor, on behalf of the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arche Latin America Center and Caribbean Initiative, and all our partners gathered here today, we're grateful for your presence and your engagement with this forum. So please join me in welcoming the Governor of Florida, the Honorable Ron DeSantis.
Oh, thanks so much. Great. Good to see you all. Thank you. Please have a seat. It's great to be here. Weather's nice. There's a lot of stuff. I know we have the Food and Wine Festival going on in Miami Beach. This is a very busy time of year to be in, particularly in South Florida. And the traffic validates that, because I landed, in the airport, and it took me almost an hour to go 9 miles. But here we are, and we're happy to be here. I'm thinking back as we looked at how kind of Florida's role in maritime, and particularly with our partners in the Caribbean, a lot of great countries that we have a huge impact with, from the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, all these others. We had an issue with during COVID where the CDC shut down the cruise lines. And, I was like, and I understood, particularly in those early days, people didn't know that you had a breakout on one of the ships, an outbreak on one of the ships, and so they were doing stuff. And, sometimes some people were just trying to be cautious. But then it got to the point, I'm like, well, wait a minute. You have an unelected bureaucracy that's going to just shut down an entire industry. That's not the way this country works. And so we actually sued the CDC, and we had a long kind of fight with that. We sued the cruise ships, didn't even sue, because they were scared of the federal government. They were scared, I think, of reprisal. So we sued on that, and we ended up winning that lawsuit, and really helped pave the way for the cruise lines to get back and going. It's an important part of our economy. Obviously, it's an important part of tourism. But one of the things we did, I remember we did an event. I think we were at the Port of Miami, and I had all these workers there. And, a lot of them were having tough time because, part of it is, they needed income and all this. But a lot of it was like, this is part of their lives, their friends that they work with, all these other things. And it was like really, really a big deal to be able to get back to normal. So we're able to do that. And obviously, I think those cruise lines had much better productivity out of Florida than in some of the other areas that they've been able to do, and we recognize how important that is. We also have great synergy with a lot of the nations around this area. I mean, I remember when Hurricane Dorian came in 2019, that was actually, a lot of people thought it was going to hit Florida. So we did a lot of preparations. I mean, like that was my first year as governor, and so we had instituted some changes in terms of how we respond to storms. And one of the things is working with all the utilities to pre-stage these trucks so that when the storm passes, you can reconnect and get people up on their feet with the electricity and everything like that, gas, all the things, all the essentials. So we were doing all that, and we were preparing, and it's kind of coming towards the peninsula of Florida. But I also looked at all the storms that had ever come that way since 1851. They have them plotted, and I had my staff do that when I took office. And, I looked, and most of them do turn, and then they ride the coast. And so Florida haven't had very many storms actually make a direct impact north of like Palm Beach. I think there was one, like 1964 or something, Dora hit Jacksonville, but they tend to do that. Now, I was not going to say that publicly. So the minute I say it's going to turn and it doesn't, oh, the governor said not to worry about it. But I'm thinking we're prepared. We don't know what's going to happen, and so we're assuming it's going to hit, but I also think it's probably going to turn. And I was telling people that privately, my staff, and I was like, I'm not going to say it publicly, don't worry, but I do think, because I just saw it so many times happen, and the curvature of Florida and all this stuff. So it ends up turning north, and so we had really no impact from Hurricane Dorian, and that got over 180 mile an hour sustained winds. It was a Category 5 storm, but the Bahamas, really, Marsh Harbor all the way into Freeport, and it was going very slowly over the Bahamas, so really punishing, and then they did that. But, there's a lot of Floridians that go there, they fish, they boat, they vacation, some of them have homes there, and so there was a lot of private support to be able to help folks in the Bahamas. And I mean, there was millions and millions and millions of dollars from Floridians that were put up towards that effort, to help the victims of Hurricane Dorian. And I remember getting in I think the Coast Guard flew us around over that after the storm, and you're looking down, and I mean, man, it was some serious, serious damage, and I've been able to see how that's recovered over the years. Bahamian time is not quite as fast as we do it in Florida. They do it a little slower. We take pride in really being very, very fast with everything we're doing, but they have recovered, and I've seen some of those areas since then, and I'm glad that. But, there was a lot of Floridians who were involved in that. So, our state is a great state to be kind of this gateway, partially because we're doing the things that you need to do as a state. We're doing it right. There was some news recently about New York City putting out their budget, and I think they put out a budget, and they have 8 million people. Budget's a $130 billion proposal. Florida, we have 23.5 million people, and our budget's $117 billion. And so it's like, well, wait a minute, why are you spending all that? And then the state of New York, they have twice the budget, more than twice the budget than we have in Florida, yet, we have better roads and infrastructure, services. Our public university systems ranked #1 in America, and we have the lowest tuition for in-state residents in the United States of America. So it's like some of these things are just choices. If you look at all the debt that the state of Florida accumulated over 180 years of our state's history, just since I've been governor, 7 years, we've retired half the debt of the state. And so we now have the lowest per capita debt of any state in the United States. And I think your share as a Florida resident would be about $400 per person. Your share of the federal debt as a U.S. citizen, I think, would be about $120,000. And so it's a much different situation, and ours is going down, theirs is going up. And I'd always tell people, there's the clock in New York City where they would always have the national debt adding, so going up. They've been doing it for decades. I was like, can someone please do a debt clock of Florida? Because it would actually be counting down, not counting up. Imagine that. Isn't that a great thing to be doing? So we've been able to do that. We have no state income tax, which is obviously something we're very fortunate to have. It's now been making news. You've got people fleeing California for Florida, many people to South Florida, because there's a proposal in California to levy this 5% wealth tax. First of all, a wealth tax is bad policy because a lot of this stuff has already been taxed, and to the extent some of it hasn't been, it's basically an unrealized gain. So you going in and just taking 5% is not good policy, but you also have a provision that says whatever your voting rights are, they're going to impute that you own equity in that. Well, just imagine people that have founded companies, maybe they own some, but their voting rights are a lot more. You're imputing massive amounts of money that they don't actually even own, but you're making them liable for the tax. So it's really an insane policy. It's caused a lot of people, very significant people, to flee because I think they're really worried about what's going to happen. Maybe this doesn't end up passing, but when you have these referenda that you can put on the ballot, it's just a matter of time before something passes. And we're here in the 250th anniversary of the United States' founding. The founders declared independence. They listed the reasons. They sketched out the underlying rationale and the source of rights and all these, the famous Declaration of Independence and the language in there, which is very important. But it took them another decade to come up with a framework of government, writing a U.S. Constitution and getting that ratified. And if you read the founders, one of the things they were concerned about is, they didn't want a monarchy, and they wanted government to rest on the consent of the people. But they didn't want your rights to just be decided by the bare majority of one popular vote in some referendum. They were very concerned about that. If 50% plus one can take property from others, then eventually this whole thing just goes asunder. And so I think part of the problem with California and why people leave is because they're concerned that if that's the way the government's operating, it's just a matter of time before they do a lot of dumb things. So you're now having people that are coming to Florida who've been very significant, and I think you've seen that very significantly in the last probably 2 months. New York, people would say, they elect this guy mayor, have you seen a flood of people? I don't know that we necessarily have. It's obviously early in the tenure, and so as that happens, you may see. But I will say there's a lot of meat that's been taken off the bone. A lot of people have moved down here over the last 7 years, and we've probably had one of the most significant periods of in-migration that any state has had in American history. In fact, if you look at the income that has moved into Florida since I've been governor, that is more income, even adjusted for inflation, than has ever moved into an American state in the entire history of the Republic. That's a pretty significant thing to have happen. And the number 2 state over this period of time to us is Texas, but I think we're 3 or 4x what has moved in to Texas over the last 7 years. So that's really, really significant. And the way I view it is I'm not asking people to move here because, some of my friends have been, man, we've got a lot of people that have come. Like, we don't need any more people. I'm agnostic about it. It's a free country. You can move where you want to move. You can do business where you want to do business. I'm not begging people at all to come. And honestly, having some moderation in that isn't the worst thing in the world from where we were a few years ago where so many people were flooding here. But be that as it may, it's a free country and people vote with their feet. And you see a very, very consistent trend of people leaving states that have high taxes, bad regulatory environment, bad approach to crime, too much homelessness, all these other things, moving to states, with Florida being the number 1, that take a different approach to all that. And that's likely to continue on some level for the foreseeable future. So all that being said, I think Florida is really a strong foundation from where you would want to have this gateway to the Caribbean. Obviously, we're really a gateway to the entire Western Hemisphere, particularly here in South Florida, and it's something that's going to continue to be an engine for years and years to come. I don't think there's been any state in the country that has been more supportive of investing in our seaports than we have here in the state of Florida. I mean, we've done really historic investment. Clearly, Miami, Port Everglades, we've got them up and down the coast, on both coasts, and it's been a real important part of our economy, both in terms of tourism, but also in terms of international trade. And I remember when they weren't able to get the ships in to Long Beach, we said we'll take the ships into Florida, and we actually had some of the ships come for a time being, and we're very proud of that, and we're going to continue to do it. So I look forward to continuing these great relationships. I do some limited trade missions around the country, or around the world. We've done Japan, South Korea, Israel, United Kingdom, Ireland, Italy, and then we did the air show in France. We may be doing some stuff in the Western Hemisphere. Pretty easy to make some stops into the Caribbean. So we're going to work on maybe doing that and see if we can continue to bolster the relationship between the free state of Florida and our neighboring countries here that are close by. And everyone in this region has to deal. We didn't have any hurricanes this past year in 2025. I know that wasn't true for everyone. In fact, we were at Bermuda for the reinsurance conference, and they had gotten some. I think they're so used to it because they're kind of just out there. And I know we had another one that hit Jamaica. But Florida, we didn't have one after having 3 hurricanes in 2024. And we had a 10-year period where we didn't have any storms hit the state from 2006 until 2016. I'm hoping that this is another one of those periods where we have a good trend of tranquil summers. We'll see what happens. We did have that. We're always very prepared for that, and we're going to continue to do it. But clearly, when you live in this part of the world, I think us and the neighboring countries really understand what's going on. So the sky's the limit for what we can do. we're going to continue doing the right things. We're going to continue getting things done. And we look forward to working everyone that's involved, not just in tourism and maritime, but also international trade between the state of Florida and our neighboring countries. So God bless everybody. I hope you enjoy it down here in Miami Beach. There's a lot going on this weekend, so hopefully you guys can partake, but it's a great time to be in South Florida. Thanks, everybody. God bless.